Yesterday, we were looking at the economic implications of the disruptions in the Red Sea. Now, the attacks on the ships have had a serious impact on commercial vessels as well as trade. Some of the shipping companies, for example, sending their vessels on longer trips to avoid the rebels. Timothy Walker is a senior researcher and maritime project leader for the Institute for Security Studies and joins us live now to talk about this. Thank you so much for your time, Timothy. Let's start by explaining to some of the viewers, particularly those who don't understand, why everyone is so focused on what is going on in the Red Sea. Why is that passage so important?
Thank you for asking me on today. Yes, it's a really important topic because the Red Sea and the Suez Canal carry most of the high-value shipping, which affects countries like Europe, China, and many countries within Africa as well. Most of the manufacturing in the world of important technological things like going into our phones or cars are coming from places like China and India or Europe or going between them. And the shortest route and the most cost-effective way of getting those goods from one area to another is through the Suez Canal and the Red Sea. The alternative is going around the Cape of Good Hope, which obviously was something for centuries before the Suez Canal was dug, was what was happening. But the cost of going around the Cape is too much for many to consider taking that as a route.
And especially because when you think about, these costs, Timothy, a number of companies are possibly going to try and absorb these, but others may find themselves on the back foot here. But let's talk about the challenges that these particular vessels who are having to, be redirected face, even as they try to do this, because the trip can be extended by 10 to 14 days, but at the same time, they may have some refueling issues.
Yeah, there's several issues when it comes to refueling, not least the fact that here in South Africa, the cost of refueling, or what's called bunkering, is more than doing it in another part of the world where the ship may have started from, for instance, Singapore. So while South Africa may look in some respects to derive some kind of benefit from being a new or a more enhanced refueling station for many ships, that's not often what the shipping companies are looking for. Like I say, they're already trying to minimize the costs of a delay or a rerouting. So often they'll look for the cheapest possible alternative. So it doesn't necessarily mean that more ships will be docking within South Africa per se, but it does emphasize the important role that South Africa does play in a global system of shipping and trade, no matter if the Suez Canal is open or shut.
And one then, thinks about the fact that our very own ports, that's still a conversation that's up for discussion, because if we are to be positioned like this, it also means that we need to have ports that are functioning effectively.
Yeah, unfortunately, South Africa's ports, the main ones being Durban and Cape Town, have not received very high ratings for several years now. Problems such as congestion, load shedding, riots from a few years ago in Durban, but also things which might also come into play in the future. Several viewers in Durban will doubtless recall that a cyclone a few years ago caused a ship in Durban Harbour to lose its moorings and ended up plugging or blocking the entrance to Durban Harbour. Very, very similar to what, in terms of how photos looked, of what happened to the Ever Given in the Suez Canal a few years ago. I'm not saying that's going to happen again, but extreme weather and things like that in the Mozambique Channel. We've seen cyclones devastating Mozambique. The conditions around South Africa are not, they've been around for centuries as the Cape of Good Hope, because they were very rough, very dangerous conditions. So I'm not saying that ships will encounter problems provided they're safely navigating around the Cape, but the risk of, for instance, a crash, an accident, an oil spill of some sort does increase with the greater number of ships which come around the Cape, and not just for South Africa as well, our neighbours in the Southern African region also. So there's a real regional need to consider there'll be more ships coming into the area, more ships transiting the area. Is that going to be a risk in terms of pollution, environmental problems, as well as economics?
And especially when you think about the increase in traffic as well, is it something that we could be able to absorb should things go towards that route more frequently?
Yes, absolutely. I think absorbing that wouldn't be a problem. from 1976 until 1975, the Suez Canal was actually closed to all shipping, and all of the ships who wanted to go between, for instance, the Persian Gulf and the United States had to take the Cape route, which is why, for instance, you saw in the 1980s the development of huge oil tankers, many of which obviously crashed or caused a lot of problems, like the Exxon Valdez. So it has a precedent in terms of shipping taking the Cape route. Now, the Suez Canal is not necessarily going to be shut. Egypt, for instance, derives almost $10 billion a year revenue from it, and it does not want to lose out on that. So the pressure or the interest of not just some African countries like Egypt, but countries around the world to find a solution to keep the Cape as a route, and many ships do take the Cape route. It's not everything going through Suez. Ships, for instance, going from Brazil to China are not going to go through Suez. But interestingly as well, the Panama Canal is now suffering from drought. The reservoirs, it's a completely artificial kind of construction. It's not like the Suez Canal, which is using seawater and just the flow of water from the sea. You have a canal lock system, so fewer ships are able to go through the Panama Canal going from United States to China, for instance, or vice versa.
Timothy,
and those ships are looking for an alternate route. Suez is now close to them. So not just ships coming from China around South Africa, but ships coming from the United States around as well. It really does show a very pivotal role that South Africa and indeed Southern Africa is in.
Pardon me for coming in there, but, listening to what you're saying and looking at what has been happening over time since October 7th now, has the world's response to these attacks been effective? And if not, what is needed in order to be done, for us to then see lesser and lesser attacks? Or is this something that's likely to go on indefinitely?
Yeah. Until the last couple of days, there was a lot of, obviously, signaling that the attacks on shipping would not be tolerated, and there would be a response led by a coalition led by the United States, issuing these statements, which the Houthi did not, obviously did not agree to. They decided to carry on with attacks. So, in terms of the ability to degrade attacks, which we saw with the January 11th strikes by the United States and the United Kingdom, it hasn't really degraded the Houthis' ability to launch drones or missiles into the Red Sea, targeting, as they often claim, Israeli vessels. But the ability to target vessels within Israeli connection is not as easy as it's made out. Ownership, crewing, ports of call. This is all information which is sometimes outdated or not well shared or understood. And the kind of the targets which is the Houthis were claiming to want to stop, Israeli-bound or crewed vessels, didn't very quickly left the Red Sea area. So there are no targets per se for the Houthis to attack in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden at present. The antagonism which they've now generated, but also felt from the United States and the coalition responses to their attacks, means that it looks like this is going to continue for a long while, and indeed the number of ships and the type of ships might expand as well, to include maybe US or UK flagged vessels as well. And the more that the Houthis broaden what they feel are legitimate targets, the worse it ultimately will become in the long run, for particularly for us in South Africa, given we are so geographically remote from it. What that means is we're not directly threatened from a security side of things, but the cost of bringing things to South Africa and landlocked countries like Zimbabwe or Lesotho, the costs they then have to pay of bringing things to South Africa or the other ports and then bringing it will only increase as well. So the attacks are likely to continue for the time being, because the Houthis are using very cheap, quite easy to manufacture devices which terrorize the ships and the seafarers on them.
Sure.
And the ability, like I say, to do something about that is challenged now. But there is a United Nations Security Council resolution which was passed a few days ago, under which kind of auspices, the responses are now happening. So there is a mandate from the United Nations to halt these attacks.
All right.
So we'll continue to see how that plays out.
And indeed, we have to watch how it all plays out, Timothy, as you say. I mean, this is a very, very important route, and one wonders then what happens in the future with it all. But let me thank you so much for sharing your research and some of what you've seen and what you are watching unfold with us. That was the Institute of Security Studies Maritime Project Leader and Senior Researcher, Timothy Walker.